Hello, welcome back to our channel where we explore the deepest and most terrifying secrets of the world. Today, we have content that will make even the bravest shudder. We're diving into true and supernatural stories, reports of sinister shadows, evil presences, and ghost stories from there, as well as paranormal encounters that challenge any logical explanation. Prepare to hear reports that will move your mind and your heart. From visions of ghostly figures to terrifying premonitions, these episodes will make you question everything you think you know about life and death. Stories that will make you ponder the afterlife. Watch and draw your own conclusions. Warning: these stories are real and have been reported. They may affect the thoughts of sensitive people. They have been submitted by viewers. If you want to tell a story, please send it below. Story 1. Thomas always felt like an eagle trapped in a too small nest. His parents, though loving, were overly protective and treated him more like fragile porcelain than the adult he was trying to be. At 22, feeling an increasing need to spread his wings, he decided it was time to leave the comfort of his parental home and face the world on his own. His rebellion was not just a cry for independence. It was a test for himself to prove he could survive without the safety net of his family. After weeks of intense discussions and shed tears, Thomas packed his bags. With little money and many dreams, he moved in with a friend while looking for a permanent place to live. Freedom tasted sweet, but the responsibilities that came with it were more bitter than expected. Soon, the difficulties of managing a budget, paying bills, and feeding himself began to make him doubt his decision almost daily. Then he found Luther's advertisement, an older man renting a room in his old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The price was affordable, and the place, though somewhat isolated, seemed perfect for Thomas, who was seeking peace to plan his next steps. However, Luther turned out to be a peculiar character from the start. He had rigid habits, like taking out the trash exactly at 6 p.m. and carefully numbering the bags before putting them out. Even stranger was his behavior regarding the basement, to which Thomas was strictly forbidden access, fueling a disturbing secret about what might be down there. Initially, Thomas was willing to overlook Luther's quirks and attribute them to old age. But over time, bizarre events began to occur. He would wake up frequently in the middle of the night to find his door ajar, even though he clearly remembered locking it. He constantly felt watched, a chill in his back that never quite left him alone. One night, after getting a shock from touching his bedside lamp, he discovered a small listening device hidden inside it. Horrified by the find, he began a frantic search for cameras or other devices in his room. In doing so, he found a hidden passage behind the bathroom mirror leading to a secret room. Inside, everything was covered with a layer of dust, except for a warm glass on a table, indicating someone had recently been there. While trying to process the discovery, he heard a knock on his door. It was Luther, asking with a trembling voice if he was okay. Thomas, hiding his panic, lied that he had had a nightmare. As soon as Luther left, Thomas decided he needed to leave immediately. He began packing his things, but as he was about to leave his room, a noise from the basement caught his attention. Despite his better judgment, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Thomas descended the creaking stairs into the basement. There he found a scene that shook him to the core, a collection of personal items belonging to various people, some of which he recognized from missing person posters he had seen around town. In the center of the room was a medieval torture chamber set up, with traces of fresh blood. He ran out of the house and called the police. The subsequent investigations revealed that Luther was responsible for the disappearance of several people over the years. The shock of the truth was devastating for Thomas, who was confronted with the grim reality that evil can lurk where one least expects it. Determined not to be ruled by fear, he decided to use his experience to educate other young people about the dangers of blind trust in strangers, transforming his trauma into an awareness campaign. Over time, Thomas found peace by reconciling with his parents, realizing that their overprotection was actually a sign of deep love. But the shadow of what he experienced in that house never completely left him, always reminding him that freedom comes with its own set of dangers. Story 2. Robert and Mateus, longtime friends, lived together in Northville, Michigan, a place known for its quiet charm and the stories whispered in the corners of old buildings. Everything seemed normal until an abandoned house, strategically located across from where they were temporarily staying, caught their attention. It was an old building with appealing facade and windows that hid more than just the darkness of the night. The house had a grim reputation in the neighborhood. It was said that years ago, a man consumed by madness had murdered his entire family within those walls before being captured and sentenced to life in prison. According to rumors, his last words before being led away by the police were that he was not the perpetrator of the crimes. Something or someone had used him to cleanse the blood of his family. These rumors fueled the morbid curiosity of the young men. Robert, always fascinated by the occult and the macabre, convinced Mateus to explore the abandoned house. On a cold October night, armed only with a katana from Robert's collection of exotic items, they crossed the street, their hearts beating a mix of adrenaline and fear. As they approached the house, the cold air seemed to whisper old secrets, while the full moon cast a pale light on the damaged roof. The front door was half open, as if inviting the bravest, or the most reckless, to enter. With a flashlight in one hand and the katana in the other, Robert led the way, followed by a hesitant Mateus. The interior of the house was a picture of destruction and decay. Broken furniture lay scattered in the rooms, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. As they explored the living room, a subtle sound caught their attention, the creaking of a chair upstairs. Frozen, the two friends looked at each other, questioning without words whether to proceed. Driven by youthful defiance, they decided to go up the creaking stairs. Upstairs, a narrow corridor led to several closed doors. The heavy atmosphere seemed to carry the suppressed screams of those who had perished there. Slowly, they opened the door that appeared to lead to a children's room and found macabre drawings on the walls, distorted figures and words hastily scribbled. In the center of the room was an old doll positioned as if it were staring directly at them, its glass eyes reflecting the flashlight's beam. The climax of their adventure occurred when they decided to investigate the attic. As they pulled the rope that released the foldable stairs, they were met with a musty, damp smell. With courage, Robert first and then a reluctant Mateus climbed up to the attic. It was filled with personal belongings and old boxes, but what truly terrified them was the discovery of an improvised altar, surrounded by old family photos with the eyes crossed out. Suddenly, a soft, barely audible sigh made them turn around abruptly. A tension was palpable. The air seemed to thicken around them, heavy and cold. As they illuminated the corner with a flashlight, the light revealed a hunched figure with torn clothes and a wild look. It was not a ghost, but an old, worn-out man, constantly muttering about the necessity of cleansing. Before they could react, the figure lunged at them with surprising speed. Instinctively, Robert used the katana for defense, but the struggle was chaotic and desperate. They finally managed to push the man away, ran down the stairs, crossed the living room, and left the house, their heavy breathing breaking the silence of the night. Safely back in their rented house, they locked all doors and windows. The shock of the experience had shaken them, but one certainty remained. The house harbored secrets far deeper and more disturbing than any story the neighbors told. The truth about what happened that night in the abandoned house remained a mystery, and the shadow of the man they had encountered would never completely leave them. Even years later, as life led them on separate paths, the house in Northville remained a grim reminder that some places retain the echoes of their tragic stories, waiting to be discovered by those brave, or foolish, enough to listen. Story 3. Hello, my name is Adamar, and I want to share my story. I am 64 years old and come from Texas. Today, I run a small store in town, but for many years I was a long-haul trucker, traveling through Brazil, the United States, Mexico, and many other places around the world. I even occasionally visited Paraguay, Argentina, and Venezuela. During my travels, I saw many strange things that would shake even the bravest man, but one experience made me finally put down the steering wheel and open the small store I run today. For a long time, I was uncomfortable sharing this story, and even today, more than 20 years after the event, I get a lump in my throat and goosebumps when I think about it. But I think it's important that people know that there's more on these roads than can be explained. There are ancient terrors, sinister and dark creatures, and a lot of danger. The supernatural lurks at the edge of the roads in such strange forms that not even the most creative writer could imagine them. And it all began in the late 1990s, specifically in 1998. It was a difficult, but hopeful time. I had received a load of cattle that I was to take to a slaughterhouse. Since it involved live animals, I had to be especially careful. The plan was to set out on Thursday morning from the interior of Mato Grosso and drive non-stop until I reached my destination on Saturday morning. I would only stop to refuel and take a short lunch break to refresh the animals in the shade, as the sun was very hot and there was a risk of losing some of the animals due to the heat. Initially, everything went well, the agreed price, the planned route, and with the loaded truck, I took the cattle and set off. For those who do not know the interior of Mato Grosso, you must understand that everything is very far away. The next cities are 100, 200, 300 kilometers apart, and the roads are still in poor condition even today. So imagine what it was like back then. A path through the jungle, surrounded by forest, improvised wooden bridges, and roads that led through villages and farms. Not to mention the ferries we had to take to cross rivers and continue on the other side. It's important to mention that no one wanted to drive on those days because of Lent, especially on that date, as it was Friday the 13th. I didn't want the job either, but the payment was high, much more than the usual freight rate, and that tempted me. But I knew I was about to have one of the worst experiences a person can have. At the appointed time, I started my heavy truck, tuned the radio, listened to an old tune, and set off, but not without first praying and asking for God's protection. I have always been a great admirer of the Virgin Mary, coming from a Catholic family, and I know that helped me, as I was often spared from accidents, robberies, and animals that suddenly jumped onto the road, during my many years on the road. Everything you can imagine, I have survived, and I am sure it was the protection of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus that saved me. I even had a picture of them in the glove compartment, a picture that I still keep in my small store today. I traveled alone, accompanied only by a parrot named Pareco, a cheeky bird that always made me laugh when he started swearing as soon as someone entered the cabin. He always greeted people with "Let's go, ugly beast." I had taught him that to tease my traveling companions, as it was common to travel in pairs on long journeys. The night was quite cool, and fog began to cover the road, which increased my attention. But as the sun gradually rose, the temperature increased, and the day became brighter, causing the fog to disappear. Thursday went well. It was the 12th of the month, and as usual, I was very superstitious and felt that I needed to take extra precautions the next day. That's why I stopped at a church in one of the small towns along the way and got some holy water, because on a Friday the 13th, anything can happen. Better safe than sorry. The day went normally, the temperature was pleasant, and I decided not to even stop for lunch but just keep driving. I thought if I drove without interruption, I might reach my destination that same night, instead of Saturday morning. I was rested and well nourished, so there was no danger of falling asleep. I had done these marathons before and was relaxed about it. But then everything began. It was Thursday night going into Friday, around 3 in the morning. The weather suddenly cooled, and my radio unexpectedly went silent. All I could hear was interference on all stations. I found it strange because I had driven through this area many times, and this had never happened before. But I trusted in God and continued driving, praying. Unfortunately, the fog returned, forcing me to reduce my speed and be even more vigilant. I was about to drive 200 kilometers straight, a stretch where accidents can easily happen because the road is so straight that you can easily fall asleep. It's normal to unconsciously switch off with your eyes open, and suddenly realize that 15, 20 minutes have passed, although you've only blinked. We call this state sleeping with open eyes. Once, I saw a colleague almost have an accident, and I only realized that he had fallen asleep when I heard him snoring. The poor guy was sleeping with his eyes open and steering the truck into oncoming traffic. I immediately grabbed the steering wheel, and he woke up startled, but fortunately, the shock did not cause an accident. It's terrifying to see a 20-ton steel beast out of control. That's the perfect recipe for disaster. I began to pray aloud, hoping that this would not happen to me, and the cattle in the back of the truck, which had been quiet until then, began to moo as if they were accompanying my prayers. It was a strange sound, almost like a lament, a cry that I had never heard before, and it made me shudder. I took the picture of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus out of the glove compartment and placed it on the dashboard, praying for protection. And then I saw a woman on the roadside, walking in the opposite direction. She was dressed all in white and gestured to the side, as if she wanted to show me something. I didn't stop but tried to ignore her. A woman in white in the middle of the night on a remote road, that was definitely not something earthly, especially there, where there was only forest and road. I continued driving, praying, and looked at the clock. It was 3 minutes past 3 in the morning. They say that's the witching hour, and after what I experienced, I believe it too. I drove for a few more minutes when suddenly the woman reappeared. It was the same woman in white, making the same gesture. I tried to ignore her, but the feeling of fear began to grow inside me. I looked at the clock again. It was still 3 minutes past 3, which was impossible because several minutes had passed between the first and second appearance. I continued driving, and the woman appeared again. I accelerated a bit, but she appeared 3 more times. Each time I looked at the clock on the dashboard, it showed 3 minutes past 3. Then I heard a noise behind me. It was Pareko the parrot saying, "Let's go, ugly beast," something he always said when someone came into the cabin. I got goosebumps, but I didn't turn around or look in the rearview mirror. Do you know the feeling when someone is standing behind you? That's exactly what I felt, such great fear that it almost paralyzed me. But something told me not to turn around, no matter what happened. Pareko continued to speak, but his voice no longer had the cheerful tone that parrots usually have. Instead, it was an ominous voice, as if he himself was afraid of what he saw. I began to pray aloud again, my voice as my shield, and whatever was with me in the cabin would not harm me as long as I continued to pray. The cold intensified, and the fog became even thicker. Despite the headlights being on, I could barely see a few meters ahead. A slow, exhausted breath approached my ear, and a putrid smell of death filled the cabin. I could almost feel the thing breathing directly behind my neck, with its demonic and ice-cold breath. "Let's go, ugly beast," Pareko repeated, as if he were warning me about what was waiting for me. The clock still showed the same time, and I began to panic. It got even worse when I heard the thing whisper, "Aren't you going to turn around to look at me?" It was my mother's voice. I recognized it immediately. The only problem was that my mother had died more than 15 years ago. I slowed down as the fog thickened, trembling with tears in my eyes and a dry mouth from fear. I drove the truck to the side of the road, turned on the hazard lights, and slowly opened the truck door. I got out and stepped onto the dry mud of the road. I took a cigarette out of my pocket and lit it with trembling hands. I looked into the forest next to the road and saw several red eyes hiding in the darkness. I was torn between staying outside with them or returning to the truck with that thing. I prayed quietly, asking God for the strength to endure this trial, and in the distance on the roadside, I saw the same woman approaching me. Her white dress, now I could clearly see her face, was pale, and her long hair fell over her shoulders. I thought about running, but where to? I couldn't just leave from here, and it was impossible to drive the truck with that thing in it. The woman in white came closer and pointed to the forest. As she walked, she seemed to float, as if she wasn't touching the ground, but her long dress prevented me from seeing her feet. "Let's go, ugly beast," the parrot repeated. "Hey, is Mom okay?" said the thing in the cabin, and the eyes in the forest shone even more intensely watching me. I decided to look in the direction the woman was pointing, and I saw small white spots flashing. There were countless, like candle flames, and a procession began emerging from the fog. Story 4. On the edge of the university town, enveloped in a dense fog that seemingly cloaked the campus in a mantle of mystery and isolation, stood the old dormitories of Eldrich University. Many years ago, these dormitories were sealed and forgotten, their stories and secrets obscured by time. Lucas, a journalism student with an insatiable curiosity and a penchant for mysteries, had always been fascinated by the rumors that circulated about these dormitories. Stories of apparitions, unexplained noises, and a basement where, it was said, macabre rituals were conducted in the 70s. This rainy October night seemed like the perfect opportunity to explore the place. Carefully prepared, Lucas took his backpack, equipped with a powerful flashlight, a voice recorder, and a photo camera. When he arrived at the location, the atmosphere was oppressive, the silence only broken by distant thunder. The building was overgrown with ivy, and the windows were broken, staring out like empty eyes. As Lucas pushed open the rusty door, his flashlight cut through the darkness like a knife. The interior smelled musty and abandoned. Footsteps echoed through the empty corridor, each sound amplified by the silence. The old rooms were covered with dust and debris, littered with remnants of broken furniture. Lucas felt a constant presence, as if invisible eyes were watching him from every dark corner. Then he descended into the basement, the air growing colder as he went down. The stairs creaked under his weight, each step intensifying the feeling that he should not go on. But his curiosity was greater than his fear. At the bottom, his flashlight revealed a horrifying scene. In the center of a circle of old chairs was a large pentagram painted on the ceiling, its red color still vibrant as if it were fresh. Despite the fear, Lucas began to document everything. He photographed the pentagram, the ritually arranged chairs, and then noticed small objects scattered around. Small bones, half-burned black candles, and an old book with a leather cover. When he opened the book, he found pages full of strange symbols and texts in an unknown language. Suddenly, a sound of whispering began to fill the air, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. Lucas, startled, saw nothing around him, but he felt a pressing presence pushing him out. He ran back to the stairs, the whispering growing as if a storm was forming around him. As he left the basement, the noise abruptly stopped, leaving only the sound of his panting breath and the distant thunder. He ran through the corridor, left the dormitories, and ran through the rain back to his own room at the university. The next day, Lucas found a threatening message on his door: "Let the past rest, or you're next." Frightened, but still driven by the need to understand what he had experienced, he decided to keep the secret while continuing his research. In the following days, Lucas tried to learn more about the symbols and the book, but each step seemed to draw him deeper into a puzzle without answers. He also noticed that he was being followed by a hooded figure who never came too close, only watched from a distance. Every night, strange noises and knocking at his door disturbed his sleep, and he began to feel increasingly isolated and paranoid, as if the shadows around him were moving. At the end of the semester, after months of research and constant fear, Lucas disappeared. His room was found empty, except for a single page from the book he had found, placed in the center of the room, with a message in red ink: "You did not heed the warning." Lucas was never heard from again. The university covered up the incident, and the dormitories were eventually demolished. Yet the rumors persisted, and some say that on stormy nights, one can see the figure of a young man wandering across the campus, a flashlight in hand, as if he is still searching for answers. Story 5. Lucas and Brian, two brothers just 2 years apart, found themselves as heirs to an old rural farmhouse, a vast land that had belonged to their reclusive Uncle Arthur for decades. Since his youth, Uncle Arthur lived isolated on this estate, avoiding visits as much as possible, surrounded by secrets and stories whispered by the locals on cold winter nights. When the uncle died and left the estate to the brothers, they decided to spend a summer exploring the place. What they found, however, were secrets that went beyond the simple tales of an old haunted house. On the first day, as they explored the property, they discovered an old barn whose doors creaked in the wind, playing a sinister melody that seemed to whisper warnings into their ears. As night fell, dense fog began to cover the land, and the shadows of old trees cast grotesque figures against the weak moonlight. Then, Lucas saw for the first time the distant light of a lantern wandering across the field. It was carried by an invisible hand. The light danced between the trees, approaching and moving away, as if carried by a boy running freely across the field. Intrigued and frightened, Lucas mentioned the sighting to Brian, who laughed and doubted until he saw the light one night himself. They decided to investigate. Armed with courage and their own lanterns, they followed the mysterious light on a particularly dark night. As they approached, the temperature dropped drastically, and the sound of their footsteps seemed muffled by a pressing presence. As they drew closer, the figure of a boy, pale as moonlight, appeared before them holding a lantern. His eyes, two black orbs, fixed on the brothers, and with a voice that froze their hearts, he said, "I did not call you to play. Do not follow what you do not understand. Frightened, they ran back to the house, while laughter echoed behind them, dissolving with the fog at dawn. In the following days, they tried to ignore the incident and focused on renovating parts of the house. Yet even stranger events began to occur. Farm animals were found dead, completely drained of their blood, and unexplainable lights were often seen in the night sky. One night, while investigating the lights, they found a scarecrow in the middle of the field that had not been there the day before. As they approached, they realized it was not a scarecrow but the body of a headless man. Horrified, they watched as the body disappeared before their eyes, as if it had never been there. Weeks passed, and the brothers became increasingly entangled in the mysteries of the estate. Determined to understand what was going on, they researched in the local library and discovered that the farm was built over an ancient Native American graveyard and that Uncle Arthur had been a scholar of the occult, particularly interested in ancient and forgotten rituals. One night, as they attempted to perform a ritual to contact the spirits of the land as described in the uncle's manuscripts, something went terribly wrong. The sky opened with thunder, and a ghostly figure, the headless man, appeared before them, followed by the lantern boy. The boy pointed at the headless man and whispered, "He knows what you are looking for." At the height of their terror, the brothers fled, but when they returned to the house, they found it in flames, with all their research and discoveries burning inside. With nowhere to go, they watched as the fire consumed everything, including the secrets they had so desperately tried to uncover. Years later, still haunted by the visions and what they had experienced, Lucas and Brian never spoke again about the summer on that farm. They moved far away to leave the past behind, but always on full moon nights, they swore they could hear the laughter of a boy and the sound of headless footsteps in their nightmares. The mystery of the farmhouse and its sinister legacy remained unsolved, a chilling tale they never quite dared to tell. Story 6. It was a typical autumn night in a small town in the United States. John, a 22-year-old young man, was home alone in a somewhat outdated house on the edge of the neighborhood, where the city lights barely touched the shadows that moved with the wind among the trees. John was an avid online gamer, and this night was no exception. He had settled into his room on the second floor, the glow of the monitor illuminating his focused face as he navigated through virtual worlds. The house, enveloped in silence except for the occasional clicking of commands and the background music of the game, seemed a refuge against the outside world. However, as the night progressed, an uncomfortable feeling began to creep into John. It was as if he were being watched, a feeling he tried to ignore by focusing on his game. Then he heard the sound, 3 firm, decisive knocks on the front door. Surprised, he took off his headphones and listened again. There it was, knock, knock, knock. Reluctantly, John went downstairs, the old wood creaking under his steps. Through the peephole, he saw a man standing under the dim light of a street lamp on the sidewalk. It was a stranger, dressed in a dark coat, with the hood pulled deep into his face. "Is Jack there?" came the hoarse, insistent voice of the man. "I don't know any Jack." "You must have the wrong house," John replied, his voice trembling with sudden fear. "Are you sure?" the man insisted, leaning closer to the door as if trying to peer through the peephole. Startled, John stepped back, hurried over to close the curtains of the nearby windows, and checked the locks which, to his relief, were secure. As he returned to the hallway, his heart froze when he saw the silhouette of the man through the thin curtain next to the door. He was looking straight in, as if he could see through the fabric that separated him from John. "I just want to talk to Jack." The voice of the man carried a threatening undertone that chilled John's blood. With no other option, John grabbed his phone and quickly dialed the police to report an intruder attempting to break into his house. The minutes until the police arrived seemed endless, each second pulsating with impending danger. The man, however, did not wait. With surprising strength, he began to pound on the door, the blows echoing through the house like the hammers of fate. When the police finally arrived, the man had disappeared. The search in the vicinity yielded no clues about his identity or intentions. John, shaken but unharmed, tried to continue his life, yet the feeling of being watched never left him. Days passed, and John began to notice small out-of-place objects in his house, and sometimes late at night, he seemed to hear whispering from the shadows. The police had no answers, there were no signs of forced entry, and nothing had been stolen. Weeks turned into months, and fear settled deep within John. He began to question his mental health as he saw figures lingering at the edges of his field of vision, always whispering the same name, Jack. The true horror of the situation unfolded one night when John was awakened by an icy chill and strangely found the house open. As he walked down the stairs, the whispering became clearer, leading him to the basement. There, in the midst of the shadows, he saw the silhouette of the man in the coat, standing with his back to him against a wall covered entirely with photos and newspaper clippings. Every image, every article, every note was about him, John, not Jack. Before he could react, the lights turned on, and the man turned around. His face, expressionless and cold, fixed John with an intensity that froze him in place. "You never understood, John. It was always about you," came the revelation, not as an answer but as a harbinger of more mysteries. Before John could say anything, the man disappeared into the darkness of the basement, leaving him alone with the photos of his own life and the echo of a name that was never his. The subsequent investigation could not unravel the mystery behind the appearances or the intentions of the man. John soon moved out of the house to escape the shadows that had crept into his life, but the mystery of Jack, or the truth behind those appearances, remained unsolved, haunting him with the possibility that some questions might be better left unanswered. Story 7. Alice Monroe was a young woman full of dreams and aspirations, living in bustling New York City. She worked as a prostitute to pay her bills, but she always knew she deserved better and dreamed of one day starting her own cosmetics company. Her beauty was unparalleled, a mix of classic features with a look that seemed to see through the soul, which did not go unnoticed. One day, while working in a luxurious hotel in Manhattan, Alice was approached by an elegant man with a soft voice and piercing gaze. He introduced himself as Mr. Landon, a successful businessman and influential member of the Freemasons. Landon was not only captivated by Alice's beauty, but also by her intelligence and determination. He made her an offer: if Alice agreed to join a special Masonic lodge and participate in their rituals, he would secure the necessary investments for her business startup. Driven by the chance to change her life, Alice accepted the offer and was quickly initiated into the Masonic rituals. These were no mere ceremonial meetings. They involved ancient practices promising power and protection, including rituals that tested her courage and loyalty to the extreme, such as drinking the supposed blood of the covenant to seal her devotion to the lodge. Soon, Alice's fortune began to turn dramatically. With Landon's financial backing, she founded her company, which quickly flourished and made her a rising star in the business world. However, the price for her new life soon became apparent. As her wealth and status grew, personal tragedies began to haunt her. First, it was the mysterious illness of her beloved sister, followed by the inexplicable death of her best friend in a car accident. With each tragic event, Alice began to recognize the dark pattern behind her gains. She realized that the price for her rise was tied to losses in her personal life, a macabre pact she had unwittingly accepted when she drank the blood during the ritual. Desperate for freedom and wishing to save those she still loved, Alice confronted Landon and demanded to be released from her obligations to the lodge. Landon, with a cold smile, merely reminded her that pacts with Freemasonry are eternal and that her resignation could cost much more than she was willing to pay. A few days after the confrontation, Alice suffered a terrible accident. Her last memory before losing consciousness was the sight of a hooded figure at the wheel of the car that hit her. She survived but was thereafter confined to a wheelchair, her mobility and independence drastically reduced. Alice Monroe had climbed the societal ladder quickly, driven by ambition and the allure of a promise of power and wealth. Yet with each new success, the shadows around her seemed to deepen, creating a cloak of fear and paranoia that slowly began to suffocate her. After the terrible accident that left her wheelchair-bound, Alice realized that her life had become the stage of a sinister game controlled by hidden forces. The luxurious apartment she had purchased with her new wealth, once a symbol of her freedom and success, now seemed like a Gothic prison. Unexplained noises echoed through its vast spaces at night, indecipherable whisperings, footsteps in empty rooms, and the distant sound of chains being dragged across the cold marble floor. It was as if the walls were permeated with the dark essence of the rituals she had participated in. Alice began to see figures at the edge of her vision, hooded figures that disappeared when she tried to look directly at them. Particularly disturbing were the mirrors. Each reflection seemed to distort her image, sometimes showing her surrounded by dark figures or worse, showing her face with grotesque expressions she had never made. The loneliness amplified her terror. Every silent phone call, every knock on the door with no one on the other side, fed her growing despair. Alice knew she was being watched, punished for her attempt to loosen the ties she had so carelessly accepted. The weight of isolation was tangible, and her mental health began to fracture under the relentless pressure of fear and guilt. On one particularly dark night, as the rain pounded against the windows of her apartment, Alice had a vision that shook her to the core. In the blurred reflection of the window, she saw herself standing, not confined by the wheelchair, surrounded by lodge members in their ceremonial robes. They observed her with critical eyes, and one of them, very similar to Landon, stepped closer and whispered, "You can never leave us, Alice. You belong to us now, body and soul." Panic caused her to scream, but no sound came out. Her voice was as trapped as her body. The next morning, exhausted and defeated, Alice made the only decision she had left. She would sell everything and move to a small town, hoping to hide from the clutches of her pursuers. Yet peace was a distant and elusive lover. Even in her new home, Alice's fear never completely disappeared. At night, she could hear the sound of a car stopping on the street, car doors gently closing. Sometimes, in the moonlight, she believed she saw figures watching her house from the shadows. Alice spent her days in constant vigilance, every little noise or disturbance a potential threat. Her health deteriorated, her spirit broken by the promises of an order that demanded far more than she could have ever imagined. In the end, Alice Munro became only a shadow of herself, a warning to those who come too close to secrets that should remain hidden. She spent her days looking out the window, the world outside so close yet unreachably far, reflecting on the terrible price of her grand dreams. The irony of her existence. A woman who once reached for the stars, now trapped in a labyrinth of her own decisions and the machinations of a power far beyond her understanding. Story 8. Jonathan Greer always felt a veil of mystery surrounding his family, especially his uncle, Robert Greer, a man of impressive presence and disturbing gaze, who died under unexplained circumstances. It was said that Robert had committed suicide, but the murmurs among family members hinted at a darker fate. They whispered about the influence of Freemasonry, an organization to which Robert had dedicated his life and which, according to rumors, demanded a high price for its secrets. When Jonathan inherited his uncle's house in South Dakota, he returned to the town with a sense of dread, aware that there were hidden stories in the dark corners of the old mansion. The house, with its creaking wooden structures and corridors that seemed to whisper secrets, appeared to have a life of its own, pulsating with the echoes of the past. During renovations, Jonathan discovered a secret room behind a bookshelf in the library, a sanctuary for his uncle's Masonic artifacts and diaries. The diaries described ancient rituals and Robert's initiation, marked by nighttime ceremonies where torch fires cast dancing shadows on hooded figures, and oaths that bound the soul to the fate of the lodge. The initiation, described as a painful rebirth, revealed promises of power and veiled threats against those who dared to betray the circle. With each page turned, Jonathan felt the weight of invisible eyes upon him. The phenomena in the house intensified. Shadows stalked the corridors at night, and whispers filled the air, speaking in forgotten tongues. One day, as he sifted through the diaries, he read about a specific ritual that spoke of eternal payment for those who saw the secrets but decided to leave the Brotherhood. That night, a brutal storm isolated the house from the outside world. The power went out, and in the pulsating darkness, a hooded figure appeared in the main hallway. The presence was almost tangible, and the voice that came from the hood was both familiar and terrifying. "Did you really think you could just inherit and escape, Jonathan?" The figure approached slowly, with a faint ringing of bells with every step. Jonathan ran to the office, locking the door behind him, but the sound of scratching began to echo in the walls. With the break of day, the silence returned as abruptly as it had been interrupted. The next morning, concerned neighbors broke down the door. They found Jonathan lifeless in the office, Robert's last diary open beside him. His body was marked with ancient symbols, a silent warning that Freemasonry not only ruled in secrecy but demanded a price that only the bravest or most foolish were willing to pay. The news of his death spread quickly, yet it was shrouded in a veil of secrecy and fear, a grim reminder that there are truths in this world too powerful and dangerous to disturb. Jonathan Greer became another story whispered in the shadows, a warning to those who dare to uncover the secrets of Freemasonry. As the news of Jonathan's death spread, the local community was gripped by an aura of terror and mistrust. Many believed that Freemasonry was involved, but few dared to speak openly about their suspicions. The Greer's house, already imposing and gloomy, became a symbol of warning in the town, with residents avoiding passing by, especially at dusk. In the following weeks, the investigation into Jonathan's death was marked by strange interruptions and inconsistencies. Documents disappeared, and witnesses suddenly changed their stories or left town without a trace. The police chief, a serious and until then resolute man, seemed nervous and distracted, muttering about pressure from higher levels. Meanwhile, even stranger phenomena began to occur at the Greer villa. New residents, drawn by curiosity and the inexplicably low price, reported hearing voices whispering through the walls at night, discussing ancient secrets and impending doom. Personal items disappeared or were found in impossible places, and the cold in the house seemed to penetrate the bones, regardless of the season. A group of paranormal investigators, attracted by the stories surrounding the property, decided to conduct a nighttime vigil. They set up cameras and audio recording devices in various rooms, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. What they found exceeded all expectations. The cameras captured shadows moving against all logic, and the recording devices picked up a deep, booming voice repeatedly warning, "The veil between worlds is thin here, and the price of knowledge is the soul." As dawn broke, the investigators were pale and taciturn, unanimously deciding never to return to the house. One of them later described the experience as staring directly into the abyss, where the abyss stares back. The video of the shadows and the audio recordings were archived, deemed too disturbing to be made public. The Greer house remained closed after that night, as the town slowly built a wall of silence around it. The few who remember the events speak only in hasty whispers, fearful that mere mention might attract unwanted attention from the forces Jonathan Greer had tried to defy. Jonathan left behind not only a legacy of wealth and knowledge, but also a grim warning about the dangers of uncovering secrets meant to remain hidden. In South Dakota, the line between legend and reality is thin, and the Greer house is a constant reminder that in some cases, the deepest secrets are those that rule everything, silently watching and waiting for the next unwary to dare to lift their veil. Story 9. My name is Igor, and I've been a truck driver for nearly 20 years. In all this time, I faced many challenges on the road, but nothing compares to what I experienced in the winter of 2015 in Russia. At that time, my life was in chaos. My daughter Sasha was battling cancer, and I would have done anything to raise the money for her treatment. The medical costs were absurdly high, and every kilometer I drove was a step towards the hope of saving her. I was prepared to sacrifice everything, including my own health, to give her a chance to survive. I was on the road for days, barely sleeping, only stopping to refuel and grab quick meals. Russian roads in winter are cruel, and at that time, the cold was relentless. I was driving through the Nizhny Novgorod region, a remote area where villages are sparse and far apart, shrouded in a constant fog that seemed to suffocate any sign of life. Exhaustion began to overwhelm me. My eyes grew heavy, and the road ahead became increasingly blurred. But I couldn't stop. The thought of Sasha in her hospital bed, fighting for her life, drove me onward. Every time I thought about stopping, the image of her fragile figure gave me the strength to continue. Then one night, everything changed. I had been driving for over 16 hours straight, the truck's headlights only illuminating a few meters ahead in the dense fog. The roads were deserted, and the silence was eerie, only interrupted by the constant noise of the engine and the cutting wind outside. My eyes began to involuntarily close, and then in an instant it happened. Suddenly, I saw something in front of me on the road. It was a small figure, standing in the middle of the roadway. I quickly braked and realized it was a girl, with long blonde hair, dressed in a white dress that stood out against the surrounding darkness. My heart pounded violently. Somehow, I knew this was no ordinary sight. I stopped the truck and got out, my feet sinking into the snow. The girl looked at me, and as our eyes met, the air around me seemed to grow even colder. Her eyes, blue like Sasha's, were filled with infinite sadness. She said nothing, only raised her hand and pointed down the road, where the fog seemed to be clearing. "Who are you?" I asked with a trembling voice, but the girl did not respond. She turned around and began walking down the road, disappearing into the fog. I tried to follow her, but my feet seemed glued to the ground. Fear mixed with my exhaustion, and I began to feel that I was losing touch with reality. I returned to the truck, my head spinning from the sight of the girl. I started the engine, but the feeling that something was terribly wrong did not leave me. I drove on, but now every shadow seemed to take shape, every noise was a whisper. I began to hear voices over the radio, static noise mixing with words that made no sense, as if someone was trying to warn me. Hours later, the road began to change. It seemed as if I was driving in a place I didn't recognize, although I had driven this section countless times before. The trees by the roadside seemed taller, darker, as if they were closing in on me. The fog became so thick that I could barely see a meter ahead. Then, finally, fatigue overcame me. My eyes closed, and I was overwhelmed by a deep, uncontrollable sleep. I dreamed. I was at home, but everything was silent, as if time had stopped. I walked through the corridors, feeling a weight on my chest, a suffocation that seemed crushing. I entered Sasha's room and saw her lying in bed, as pale as the snow outside. She was so calm, so peaceful, it seemed as if she was sleeping. But as I approached, I saw that something was terribly wrong. "Sasha." I called out softly, but she did not respond. I touched her face, cold as death, and then I saw it. Her eyes were open, but lifeless. Terror overwhelmed me, and I screamed, but no sound came out. I looked around desperately, but the room was empty, except for a figure in the corner, silently watching me. It was the girl from the road. She looked at me, her eyes full of sadness, and then she whispered something I couldn't understand. Before I could react, everything around me began to collapse. The walls tore apart, the floor opened up, and I felt myself falling into an endless abyss. I woke up suddenly, gasping, still in the truck seat, my heart pounding wildly. But something was different. The truck was still, but I didn't remember braking. I looked around and realized I was in a small village, one of those places that time seemed to have forgotten. The houses were old, with broken windows and collapsing roofs. The place seemed deserted, except for a faint light in one of the houses in front of me. I decided to get out of the truck, my mind still confused from the disturbing dream. I walked to the lit house and reached the door, where I heard whispering voices. I knocked, but no one answered. The door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark room, only lit by a candle in the middle. On a table lay a photo, and as I approached, my blood froze. It was a photo of Sasha. My legs trembled, and I felt as if I was going to faint. How could this photo be here? What was happening? I picked up the photo with trembling hands, and then I heard the voice again, soft and sad, the same as the girl on the road. "She's waiting for you." I looked around, but no one was there. The candle went out, and the room plunged into complete darkness. I ran out of the house, overwhelmed by desperation. When I returned to the truck, I saw that the snow was falling heavier, covering everything under a white mantle. I climbed into the cabin and didn't hesitate for a moment to start the engine and leave the village behind. I drove non-stop, as if I was fleeing from something, but the image of Sasha in my dream and the photo in that house never left my mind. The fog was thicker than ever, and the shadows around me seemed to follow me, as if winter itself was chasing me. Finally, as the sun rose on the horizon, I saw the city where I was supposed to deliver. But something in me knew that something terrible had happened. I parked the truck on the hospital grounds, where Sasha was being treated, and got out, my legs trembling, breathing heavily. I ran through the corridors, ignoring the looks of the nurses, until I reached Sasha's room. But when I entered, everything went silent. The bed was empty, and the machines were turned off. A nurse entered behind me, with sad eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Igor. She passed away last night." My world collapsed. I fell to my knees, unable to grasp what had happened. But I saw. The words came out trembling, making no sense. The nurse looked at me with pity, but something in her eyes made me realize there was more. Mr. Igor, Sasha. She died at 2 a.m., exactly when you stopped in that village. The horror overwhelmed me. That dream, that vision. It was a warning. Sasha had tried to say goodbye to me, and I had failed to save her. I felt an absolute emptiness, a pain that no words can describe. To this day, I don't know if it was all real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. But the image of Sasha, her voice, and the girl on the road have never left me. Since then, every night I drive, I feel watched, as if something is waiting for me in the darkness. And that dream. I still dream it, every winter, when the fog covers the roads of Russia and the silence of the night becomes unbearable. Something is always there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Something that constantly reminds me that there are things between life and death that we will never understand. I lost Sasha that night, and the emptiness she left will never be filled. But what really happened in that village, on that snow-covered road, remains a mystery I will never unravel. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you have a supernatural experience, don't keep it to yourself. Write your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the inexplicable, fuel the collective curiosity, and who knows, maybe we can together uncover these mysteries that hover like fog between the world of the living and the dead. Remember, the unknown is always just a story away. And now, as the night falls, who knows what shadows might emerge from the darkness to whisper another true ghost story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you have a supernatural experience, don't keep it to yourself. Write your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the inexplicable, fuel the collective curiosity, and who knows, maybe together we can unravel these mysteries that hover like fog between the world of the living and the dead. Remember, the unknown is always lurking, just a tale away. And now, as night falls, who knows what shadows might emerge from the darkness to whisper another true horror story.